right, so here is my presentation on how chemical corporations have bypassed ethical action in the pursuit of profits. So to start, for many years, companies like DuPont and 3M went behind the backs of the general population and the federal government, remaining silent on their in-depth knowledge on the environmental impacts of perfluorooctanoic acids to save money, mortgaging the livelihoods of at-risk farmers in the process. The ability to act as such has been fostered by a lack of governmental regulation and intervention, allowing it to proceed on and on for decades. Until the day which adequate action is taken by our legislative bodies, examples such as these will continue to plague our society, harming those who can afford it least, will line in the pockets of those who can. So a little bit of background before I get into everything on the company involved, DuPont, and one of their most famous products, Teflon. So Teflon, official name, polytetrafluoroethylene, was much like many scientific innovations of the 20th century, such as Raytheon's microwave or Velcro, discovered as accident, as its 1938 creation was an accident as an attempt to form a new chlorofluorocarbon refrigerant, which had their own problems admittedly, yielded a new slippery, seemingly indestructible substance. The coating demonstrated these qualities due to the strength and nature of the incredibly strong polymerized fluorocarbon bonds. So here's what I mean when I say that. In a polymer, it's a molecule made up of many instances repeated of the same smaller mini molecule, which is known as the monomer. In this case, the monomer is a carbon backbone connected each to two fluorine molecules coming off it. Now this repeats on and on and on for a great length of time. So the way this works is the bonds between the chlorine, the carbon and the fluorine atoms is very strong due to the great electronegativity difference between the two atoms. And as a result, the molecule is almost inert in Teflon. It's hydrophobic, it doesn't like to mix with water or nearly anything else, which gives it its non-stick properties. So moving back to Teflon, the substance found its first use in the Manhattan Project, as Ms. Gordon likes to say. You know, all chemical innovations are for sex or war. As it would not react or corrode with the uranium hexafluoride being used to turn into weapons-grade uranium for the atomic bomb. After the war, the product was officially branded as Teflon and released to the public. It soon became a staple of American cookware, as its non-stick properties described in the last slide revolutionized consumer cooking pans. So the process of making Teflon stick to the cookware is kept heavily secret, but we do know that a man-made chemical, a surfactant, as Ezra was talking about in his presentation, known as perfluorooctanoic acid, which I will refer to as PFOA from this point onward. PFOA was used until 2013 for over 60 years in the production of Teflon. Much like Teflon itself, PFOA is incredibly stable, once again due in large part to the many fluorocarbon bonds. Unfortunately, this causes the substance to persist in the environment for a great deal of time, being relatively unaffected by common biodegradation processes, such as hydrolysis breaking up within water, or photolysis breaking up with light. This in turn also allows it to be easily spread across the world through the air, ground, or water. So, the plant responsible for much of what I'm about to cover is the Washington Works DuPont plant in West Virginia on the banks of the Ohio River. The plant was heavily involved in the production of Teflon for over 70 years and continues to operate to this day. The plant is located just upstream from an expanse of farmland, and it was investigated and eventually settled with the EPA for failing to properly dispose of waste products, instead buying up tracts of land for dumping, allowing said waste to seep into the local water table. So moving on, getting into perfluoroalkyls and economics. So a perfluoroalkyl is a type of organic molecule with a carbon backbone, with fluorine molecules branching from said backbone, except rather than continuing on and on and on like Teflon, repeated instances of monomer, the molecule has a substitute group at one end. In the case of PFOA, this alkyl group is a carboxyl group, symbolized as COOH. So perfluoroalkyls, like PFOA, have been shown to be very harmful to animal life, as their near indestructible nature causes the body to be unable to break them down. Within humans, they've been shown to exhibit an 8-year half-life. Department of Human Health Service studies have shown PFOAs are likely to cause increases of serum lipids, such as low-density lipid cholesterol, increased risk of thyroid diseases, increased risk of asthma diagnosis, decrease in fertility and birth weight, as well as multiple types of cancers with prolonged exposure. So around the Washington Works plant, the farming industry is very prominent. This includes mass amounts of livestock who may drink from the Ohio River, exposing themselves to PFOAs in the process. This can lead to many diseases like mentioned in the last slide, especially those impacting the kidney. Oftentimes, this has directly contributed to a mass death of farm animals, which is bad for the animals themselves, but also cripples the financial standing of their farmers. For towns like Parkersburg, West Virginia, one of the many towns affected by DuPont's legal activity, it's very difficult to come out against the chemical giant due to their large presence in the town. They're often the main employer, but also have the resources to lobby the government in the town, making it just that much harder for justice to be served. They can and did use these abilities to strong-arm those affected into not speaking out, allowing knowledge of their actions to remain concealed for decades. Eventually, the people of Parkersburg were able to overcome said barriers to form a class action lawsuit against DuPont. In the legal battle, over 110,000 documents disclosed, showing that DuPont knew about the effects of the waste like PFOA and the effects that it could have on the public and their animals. As early as 1961, they knew it had an adverse impact on liver function through animal testing. They knew it would spread extreme distances through the air with dust, settling far beyond the property lines they maintained it was contained to. They knew that when they dumped at the Dry Run landfill, the tract of land that they purchased in Parkersburg, West Virginia, to dump, it would seep into the ground, finding its way into the local water table, like the Ohio River. But they still refused to disclose anything. They did so in the pursuit of profit, as illegally dumping PFOA was more economically viable than safer means such as incineration. DuPont did so, knowing everything about the environmental impact of what they did, and continued to do so, even when the possibility of using a safer alternative was mentioned. Eventually, DuPont was found out for their actions. However, when they settled with the EPA, the price tag for their decisions was a mere $16.5 million. Well, that seems like a lot of money to us. That was less than 2% of their revenue from PFOA and Teflon that year alone. Sadly, this is not an isolated issue. Instances of similar action have taken place across the country during the same time span as DuPont's actions, such as these 3 examples taken from 2014 alone. The Hard Rock Fracking Company was only charged $25,000 and one man sentenced to 28 months in prison for over 30 instances of unsafe fracking discharge into public water supply. Citgo violated the Clean Air Act in Corpus Christi, Texas, and was fined $500,000. They made $32 billion in revenue that year. $500,000 in that lens is nearly insignificant. And even on the extreme end of violations like Unilever's Clean Water Act violations in Clinton, Connecticut, they were fined $4.5 million. They made $8.9 billion in net income, not revenue, net income that year alone. $4.5 million is just 1/20 of 1% of their overall net income. So I talked to Mr. Smith about this. He's my AP US history teacher, and he also teaches econ at the school. And when I asked him questions about why they would do something like this, he told me that when companies such as DuPont are held liable for their action, they may see it as economically viable to move elsewhere to preserve their profits. This leaves the government with really two options. They can continue to allow the harmful dump in and preserve the local economy, or they can put their foot down, leaving the people to dry at their own financial risk. He told me, quote, if a major employer leaves, it not only affects those who work for the company, but the domino effect on local industry is tremendous. The housing market will collapse, the local restaurants, bars, mechanics, department stores will all be hit and probably end up closing as well. No matter what happens in this scenario, it's the little guy who gets hurt, you know? Like if they continue to allow the dump in, it gets into the water supply, kills their animals, harms them themselves. And if they put their foot down, then it leaves, like I said, it leaves the people out to dry. They have no, with the economic situation with the Rust Belt in Midland America, there's not really much else to turn to after farming goes. So moving forward, I think that I'm in the camp of strengthening decisions against the companies, because I believe that in a scenario like this, compromise is insufficient. You know, if we meet in the middle, there will still be plenty of harm done to our environment, and the people might get hurt. So, under the 1976 Toxic Substance Control Act, the EPA can only test and ban chemicals when given evidence supporting a harmful nature. This, in turn, has allowed a nature of self-regulation for companies such as DuPont, who are given the ability to, in turn, hide said evidence as not to disrupt their profitable industry. In the near future, I say sweeping change is needed in government policy in terms of stricter regulation of chemicals used for industrial use, and punishments for violations must be made harsher by multiple magnitudes. Thank you.